I've had a weird history with the Final Fantasy series, especially because I never grew up with Final Fantasy. I mean, I grew up with the N64, and obviously, Final Fantasy, the series kind of missed me. I mean, I kind of missed Final Fantasy because they went from the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation. So, yeah, I didn't get to experience Final Fantasy VII like everyone else. But, like I said, I have a weird history. I've heard about it, many times. But I guess I first got exposed to it when I was into sprite comics, like Bob and George. Remember that? Nobody does? Wow, what a small niche. But yeah, from Bob and George, I found out about this sprite comic called 8-Bit Theater, which is pretty much based on the first Final Fantasy game. Kind of, but a bit more grotesque. They changed some stuff around, and it's pretty funny. I liked it. Then it kind of, whatever. Yeah. So that's how I got that's kind of how I got exposed to the Final Fantasy series for real. Even though I've actually seen some bits of and pieces of Final Fantasy whether it's in like music or references and whatnot. So I actually tried to try out a Final Fantasy game, and the first game I tried to try out was the first Final Fantasy game, which was a bad move because, well, I guess I was a bit too young for the NES Final Fantasy. Not to mention that that's a game where you needed to grind, and I think the way I grinded was very inefficient because, well, I would try to grind for money, but then I would need to go back to the inn where I need to pay pretty much 80% of the money I've gained in the battles where I got my ass kicked. I guess, did they ever have tents or cottages in the first Final Fantasy game? Because that would have helped. But yeah, later on I was like, screw the game. So I never really got back into Final Fantasy until like later on when Nintendo Capri Sun started his LP of Final Fantasy X. That brought me back into the Final Fantasy series because later on, I mean, I've heard of Final Fantasy X before because, I mean, it's a popular game, and I've actually heard, some music from Final Fantasy X, like obviously Suteki Dane, To Xanarkand. I think those are the only two songs I know. Not to mention some of my college friends, I've talked about it before too. And one of them tried, playing this To Xanarkand or Suteki Dane or whatever on the piano. But yeah, that's something else. So after Nintendo Capri Sun's LP started, I looked up what is the best Final Fantasy game because I was kind of curious, and I kind of expected Final Fantasy X to be number 1. It wasn't. I think it was like number 3 or number 2. Number 1 was Final Fantasy VI. Yes, Final Fantasy VI, which I barely heard about, but at the same time, now that I look back, there were so many references from that game that I've been exposed to but never realized what they were, whether it's music or just references. I mean, there are kind of some things that kind of dragged me into the game. One, the opera scene. Holy crap, the opera scene. Oh my god. Like, if I ever want to OP Final Fantasy VI, it's going to be purely due to the opera scene. Obviously, I'm not going to LP that game since, well, I'll talk about it later on. But actually, I'll talk about it right now since the next thing I'm going to say might spoil some things. So yeah, I tried to play Final Fantasy VI, and I got to the second half of the game where you're looking for people. However, okay, so I had problems with 3 characters. Maybe 4, especially 3. Gao, what was his name? Magus? No, Strago. Okay, so it's Gao, Strago, and Realm. Mostly because these are characters who... I mean, Realm was alright actually, so it's mostly with Gao and Strago, where you need to interact with random battles in order to gain a moveset. And especially Strago, you need to do specific things in order to get the right blue magic moves. And in the end I was like, screw it. This is too frustrating. And in the end, I just decided to stop playing. And yeah, now I have no motivation to play it ever since I watched Super Genius's blind LP, so I pretty much saw the game, I guess. So, however, even though I failed playing Final Fantasy VI, it was at that time when I was exposed to the rest of the Final Fantasy series, especially Final Fantasy X, of course, which I was watching, and I got to know about the story, and I was like, totally engrossed in it, especially with the story and the music and the characters. But then I was also engrossed with games like Final Fantasy VIII, kind of a little bit more like as a, seeing what the hell is going on, and the music as well. And I also learned about Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy VII. I watched AC Bailey's LP of that, actually. I mean, everybody knows Final Fantasy VII, but this time I actually watched AC Bailey's LP of it. It was pretty nice. I've realized at the end that I don't want to play the game, but yeah. And I've learned about some other Final Fantasies as well, like the later ones and the older ones. But later on, I realized that I want to play a Final Fantasy game, like, completely. So there were some games I was considering. Maybe I was thinking, like, play Final Fantasy IV, or maybe go back and try Final Fantasy VI again. So I actually asked for help. I sent HC Bailey a message, asking what's a good Final Fantasy game, what's a good first Final Fantasy game to play. I told him my situation, and he responded, surprising me. And he said, okay, so he gave me a few choices that, are obviously in his top games as well. His top games that he's mentioned in his LPs, but immediately when the message started, he mentioned a game that he said is a game that nobody hates, or nobody can hate. He told me to try it out, and so later on, like a few months later, I did. There was a kind of a slow start, but I was near the end. I got totally engrossed in it, and all I could say was, damn, you were right. And so I fell in love with the game so much, it was stuck in my head for the whole semester. Like, I kept on thinking about it, thinking, maybe I should have LP'd this game instead of Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Or more like, I can't wait until Master Quest ends so that maybe I can start in this game. Which is kind of a bad attitude, because when you LP a game, never anticipate LPing the next game, which kind of destroys your mood for the current LP. But yeah, enough about that. Now that Master Quest is over, and after some decisions here and there, I've decided that this game is that I've experienced only once. Only once. I played this game only once, so it's a game that is not... So I am going to LP this game, not as a nostalgic expert at this game who has played it in my childhood, but rather as a person who has played it once, but fell in love with it. I present to you my next game.
don't know, but you wanna try. Every time you see do you remember when we fell in love? We were young and innocent then. Do you remember how it all began? It just seemed like heaven, so I did. Do you remember back and forth? Repeat again. All day long. Do you remember?